Welcome back to Social Pulse Podcast Retail Edition, where we're digging into the challenges, successes, and stories of social media and community professionals in the industry, just like you. Subscribe to gain valuable insights that you'll be able to apply to your own work and social presence from each and every episode. Now, if you're a retail brand on social media, you've probably been watching the evolution of Threads since its launch last summer. Maybe you created an account early on, but weren't sure what to do with it. Maybe you're still on the fence about whether it's worth your time, or maybe you've been wondering if you've already missed the boat. The truth is, while platforms like Instagram and TikTok are incredibly saturated, making it harder and harder for brands to stand out, Threads represents a unique opportunity. It's like getting a chance to be on Instagram in 2012 or TikTok in 2019. The potential for organic reach, authentic engagement, and community building is extraordinary. But this window of opportunity won't last forever. And that's exactly why we brought in today's guest. Milieu Peters is the founder of Simply Multimedia, a successful marketing agency that's helped brands navigate the ever-evolving social media landscape. As an amazing content creator herself, with over 60,000 Instagram followers and over 12,000 YouTube subscribers, Mil brings both strategic insight and hands-on experience to the table. Originally from the Netherlands and now based in the US, she brings a unique global perspective to digital marketing. And today, she's here to help us understand why Threads might be the opportunity your retail brand has been waiting for. Hey, Mil, welcome to the show.
Hey Mike, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
My pleasure. I'm honestly thrilled to have you. I've been watching how you're just blowing up Threads and every other social platform, frankly, because you're brilliant. But before we dive into Threads specifically, I'd love if you could share what you're seeing in terms of organic reach and engagement challenges for retail brands on maybe some of those other social platforms.
Yeah, I think, across the board, organic reach, is one of the biggest challenges for brands, right? And so we're always looking for the next opportunity or where can we, get the most return on platforms. And quite frankly, Threads has been a great opportunity for brands, whether you're just getting started or you've already been there for a while. We have seen so much opportunity when it comes to Threads.
So, what do you think makes Threads different from other social media platforms, particularly from that retail brand's perspective?
I think what's different is, it's very text-based first. While you can share visuals, while you can share content and stuff like that, it's very low effort to get started. And quite frankly, like how what everyone has been saying about Threads is it's so easy to build genuine connections. And I think that's the another big challenge for brands is how do you build connections with your audience, with your communities, have those conversations and at the same time, those conversations lead to market research for brands. Even if you're social listening, on threads and looking at other people's conversations, right? And so it has really allowed brands of all sizes and different industries to start connecting or reconnecting with their audience. And there's not a lot of noise there because it's text based first. So it is all about interaction for most part rather than, an Instagram or a TikTok where we're all so distracted by watching videos back to back, right? And so I think that is unique about threads, so that you can have those real conversations still.
Does that mean it's necessarily taking you a lot more time? Are you spending more time on Threads as a result because it's all conversation and engagement?
Honestly, like creating wise, I spend way less time on threads versus Instagram, where you spend hours on a reel that gets you 3 likes, and I spend a couple seconds writing, my brain on threads, and it reaches thousands of people quite literally. And I've talked about that, I think, quite a bit in my content as well. It's like you're working so hard on that one platform or you're trying to make it work for you, and in the meantime you're missing the boat on other opportunities like threads where it's very low effort to get started and to reach a lot of people, especially still right now.
That's a really great point. I'm glad you mentioned that because yeah, you're spending a lot less time up front trying to create the post, trying to create the perfect video or short snippet or whatever, and then that frees you up to spend more time doing what's actually going to probably move the needle for your brand, which is to engage with
Right.
your target audience or learn from them. That was such a great point you made a moment ago, where you're actually paying attention to what they're talking about, how they're talking about it, and you're gaining that knowledge, which could be product knowledge. It could be, how people are viewing the products that you're offering or the services or your brand overall. Now, I know you've worked with a lot of brands. Kind of across social media. What would you say are some early success patterns that you're seeing specifically from retail brands on Threads?
Yeah, so I think some success we've seen, well, we work with a lot of different brands, like you say. Like we have a couple of personal brands who are more retail in terms of selling products rather than just services, and they're actually able to drive a lot of traffic also back to their Instagram. So it's not even necessarily where, hey, we're looking to convert people of one trend, right, or they see this trend and it blows up, but instead it's so interconnected with Instagram already. So if you as a retail brand are already on Instagram, this only boosts you even more because they're almost like the same platform. So patterns I've seen with those two platforms are that threads get suggested in Instagram feeds. They get notifications in people's feed of, hey, you have new followers or new threads to look at. And so obviously there was a big push from Instagram to make threads work and kind of intertwine the two platforms. And also you're not starting completely from scratch. So if you already had an Instagram audience, it's kind of like you brought that over to threads as they did that on purpose, right, where you didn't have to start completely from scratch. And so those are some early wins where specifically and especially brand awareness is huge, because you can bring that traffic over to Instagram to continue that funnel and convert them into whatever product or service you're then trying to promote.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's even more layers of connectivity where, if I'm looking at your Threads profile, there's an Instagram icon at the top.
Yeah.
With one tap, I can go over to Instagram. And that's almost necessary if we want to communicate, right? Because other than replies, if you want to do a direct message, you got to go over to Instagram. Are
Yeah.
you doing that a lot, pushing people or your clients' audiences to their Instagram to communicate?
I'm actually not necessarily pushing them to Instagram. It's all because at the same time, what I notice is Instagram is going to push me to them anyway if they interact with me. I notice that for myself as well when I'm interacting with someone on Threads. If the next moment I'm on Instagram scrolling reels and their profile pops up, I don't follow them, but I engaged with them. So that's no coincidence, right? And then
Hmm.
typically what I would use it for is more brand awareness, people to find me, recognize me on other platforms, because I start to recognize a bunch of people from LinkedIn on Threads because of the brand recognition in terms of your photo, whether it's your logo, and you deepen that connection. It's like, hey, I recognize you from LinkedIn. We haven't quite talked a lot, but now we're interacting and having fun on Threads. And at the same time, I've noticed, and when I talk to other people, is that people who follow me on Threads don't necessarily follow me on Instagram, and I think that's actually a good thing, because it's a
Hmm.
completely different type of content to consume, right? I don't blame people for not wanting to always be in all the feeds with all the creative, the videos you have to watch, you have to consume the carousels. Instead, they just want access to your brain and your thoughts and how you think, which is so unique about Threads.
It's really interesting. But one of the things that you mentioned that stood out to me was the fact that we were talking about Instagram. I would say virtually every retail brand, if they want to be successful in social media, they're on Instagram
Right.
already, right? That's just where you have to be if you're selling a product of some kind. I'm sure they're also on Facebook, and maybe they used to be on X, maybe not these days. But if we're talking about now adding an additional social network to those kinds of retail brands, maybe they're already feeling resource constrained and bandwidth constrained. How do you advise them to think about that kind of resource allocation when it comes to Threads?
Yeah, so that's a good question. One thing I would start with that I do not recommend is auto-publishing your content blindly to Threads, right? Instagram has been pushing their auto-publish button that goes from Instagram to Threads. And it's very obvious when people do that, when you're on the Threads feed and people didn't create that inside of Threads or specifically for Threads. But at the same time, it doesn't have to necessarily consume more. I think you need to work smarter and not harder, like we often say in marketing, by turning visuals into text posts, taking short snippets. Maybe it's from a blog you have on the website, taking quotes from that, sharing facts or statistics, or taking the hook from one of your captions and posting it on threads. You kind of have to be smart with it. To give you a real example on how I do that is I will take my visual carousels and I will take the text of those carousels and post them as a thread. It doesn't cost me more than a couple of minutes to even do that. And it performs well on threads as well. You just have to optimize it for the platform, just like any other platform.
That makes a lot of sense. That's one of the reasons why we're adding threads at Agorapulse as a profile. So that way, when you do have a message that you want to share out to your social profiles, you can have threads in the mix, right? You're scheduling content out, but you don't have to share the exact same content to every profile that you're
Right.
doing that post for. You can change it. You can add a video or an image or not. And so that
Yeah.
leads to another question I wanted to ask you. Are you seeing a big difference in performance when it comes to text only versus image versus videos to threads?
Yeah, I've noticed that text has really outperformed anything, really. Not to say that the video and stuff doesn't perform at all, but I think you need to really balance it out because people do not want to spend time on threads, to see a back-to-back video. But if every now and then, you share a video that also applies to threads, I would say, I think that's okay to do, but test it because every account is completely different. I can have great success with text posts, and someone else may see great results with video still. Just like on Instagram, we see that often where everyone has completely different performance. So I think test it. But for my personal experience, I've noticed text-based is really the way to go. And sometimes if it relates to threads, like when it was Threads' birthday, I did a birthday video for threads. And of course, that had to go on threads. And it made total sense to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm starting to see a lot of that myself in my personal use of threads. I've got a podcast, several podcasts, but I've got these video podcasts, and I
Yeah.
want to share the video clips. Right, like today, this morning before we recorded, I released an episode with Andrew Davis, who's a brilliant speaker, and I want to release that clip. And the more I share those kinds of clips to threads, the more I'm seeing those posts get fewer and fewer reach. So now
Yeah.
that they're interesting and engaging, I'm feeling like, yeah, I really probably should scale back how much video content I'm sharing to that particular platform. So that's, to your point, though, something every one of you listening, this is something you need to test. What works for me or what doesn't work for me isn't necessarily going to even apply to you because my content is completely different from all of your content. Folks, we're talking with Milu Peters about how retail brands can leverage the Threads platform. And I've got several more questions you aren't going to want to miss. But first, a quick message from our dear friend, Kim Garst.
I personally love Agorapulse. It's been a life changer in so many ways. One, anytime you have a tool that is kind of a one-stop shop from a management perspective, it's awesome. But some of the things I love about Agorapulse is the ability to tag conversations or to people so that you can follow up with those people and you kind of know who they are. The other thing I love is being able to see all the conversations, previous conversations, specifically in Twitter. And of course, now that you can schedule to Instagram, that's awesome. So I'm super thrilled about that. I have used a lot of different tools, pretty much all of them, over the course of the time that I've been active in social media. And when I first started using Agorapulse, and I realized that it had so many of the same functions of some of the other tools, but it went deeper. It gave you more ability to do, things that some of the others just didn't have that capability. So I'm a huge fan.
So, Mil, let's try to kind of apply this to some retail brands because you're a marketing agency, and I know you push back on this, but you are an influencer and a content creator, right? Whereas I'm also a content creator and a podcaster. So the way that we approach social media is different from a retail brand. What we would talk about is different. I think a lot of the people listening might be wondering, how are they supposed to keep their professional image while still adapting this Threads new casual conversational, we're hanging out at the bar kind of environment?
Right. Yeah, honestly, I think it's something retail brands need to learn, honestly. Very similar to corporate brands that we also work with, where we are trying to push them in a direction where we want to be more relatable. We want to have conversations. We want it to feel like there's a human behind it versus just a logo. And I think it's a great opportunity to experiment with that on Threads, try new things. And yeah, like it's hard to say, what does professionalism really mean for that specific brand. It doesn't mean you need to go rogue and share every single thought on Threads. I absolutely don't think so. But I think start testing and experimenting with it. And even if anything, if you don't post, start being part of other people's conversations, because even that will drive a lot of traffic on Threads, where you're commenting on other people's posts before even starting your own content strategy.
Oh, I love that advice. People in our space, we love watching brands like Wendy's, who obviously
Right.
just
Yeah.
crush it when it comes to social media. And just this morning, I saw a post on Threads, and somebody was remarking about how the vibe is different on Threads because there are no ads and very few brands participating. And Wendy's commented, "I know, right?" Which is so ironic and so Wendy's,
Yeah.
because obviously they're a
Yeah.
brand participating. And I don't know, I think people don't necessarily have to have that level of, sarcasm and snarkiness that Wendy's is famous for as a brand. But I think what's important that echoes what you were just saying is that a brand like Wendy's has taken the time to identify who they are as a brand. What do they sound like?
Yeah.
What is their style? What is their voice? And for any retail brand, if you haven't done that, that I think is an important exercise. You should know, what is it like to talk to us as a
Right.
brand, beyond an individual who happens to be working for the brand. What are some other practical steps that you think a retail brand could do to start building their presence on Threads this week?
Yeah, so first, the first step I would say, like I mentioned, hey, start interacting with other people, right? So you're not even having to post on your own account just yet, but get your feet wet by just interacting and participating in conversations. Some other things you can do is start following hashtags that are relevant to you as a brand. So again, you get that targeted engagement and can do some inspiration on what people are talking about in your niche, in your industry. And then start just testing by repurposing some content that you've already created on Instagram by turning it into a thread, whether you turn it into a text-based post, whether you test some of the videos. But you need to have a starting point so that from there on you can tweak and adjust and make your strategy perfect. But getting started, is the hardest part at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned hashtags because I was reminded earlier when you were talking about cross posting, one of the major differences with Threads is you only get one hashtag. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, to your point, it's really obvious when someone is cross posted from Instagram and they included 28 hashtags because that
Yes.
works on Instagram and
Right.
only one of them does anything for you on
Yeah.
Threads. So it needs to be very thoughtful and strategic what you use. And to your point, then those could also be hashtags that you're following. And then to your earlier point, engaging with the folks who are posting there. Are there any particular brands that you've been following, whether they're retail or not, that you think are also doing a really interesting job on Threads?
Um, there's no one specific that really comes to mind. I don't know if that's helpful. But really been there since day dot. One that I think of, I don't know if that counts as a brand, is like Elmo. I
Oh,
always see
yeah.
Elmo on Threads. And it's always kind of funny, and they do it's obviously it's fun and like they engage and like people feel seen and heard, or
Mhm.
whether he will go and be like, well, let me just ask you, how are you? Like that, and everyone's like,
Right?
oh, thanks, finally someone asking. But I think it is a great example of like, kind of creating that engagement, that conversation. Because like people do feel heard at that point. And if you've been on chat since day one, then you know exactly what I'm talking about when it felt like, whoa, we're connecting with anyone all over the world. And this feels so real and raw because it's no longer about someone posing on a photo and potentially photoshopping it, right? Like we see on Instagram, or questioning whether it's real, but we're just sharing our thoughts, we're conversating. And we needed more of that, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I actually think that's a great example because it illustrates how a brand can think about how they're perceived and what their audience could potentially need for them that has nothing to do with what they're selling, right? I mean, Elmo's a character from
Yeah,
Sesame Street. They want you to watch the programming so that they get advertising dollars. They are a business just like
yeah,
anybody else, but their social presence isn't necessarily about that. Is that creating a connection between an iconic character from the brand. We don't always have
yeah,
that, but you can kind of manufacture that if you need to, or create a persona or a person within the brand that's going to talk on behalf of the brand, but do something that connects with the audience. But
yeah,
that speaks to, I think, one of the larger challenges of not just Threads, but all social media. But I think Threads in particular, if we are sharing predominantly text-based posts, no links, no
yeah,
tracking, right? How do we measure what that's doing for our businesses? How do we know that this
yeah.
is actually moving the needle for ourselves?
Yes, that's a great question because I actually do use links, but I wouldn't recommend putting it into the initial thread. So something
Mm,
sneaky I often does is if I had a thread that has performed very well, very shareable, and relates to a link that I want to share. Let's say it's a YouTube video for social media managers. I will share a social media one-on-one, super relatable, text line quote for social media managers. And what I will do is I will add an extra thread to that, with like, hey, if you want to learn more about this topic, here's a new video I did. And so I do actually use links and like obviously, turn that into a bit.ly and you can track. And something interesting I found recently where, when I promote a YouTube episode, I always will post it on threads. And what I noticed is that for this specific sponsored YouTube video I did for a brand, where again, of course, I'm going to track everything for them, I noticed that the most click throughs came from threads, not
oh,
from YouTube, not from Instagram. And I was like, wow. And obviously, I had to report that back to the brand. And I was like, um, threads came out on top out of all platforms in click throughs. Um, so that's a very interesting insight, I think.
that's fascinating, and that's really good to hear. It's promising, right?
Yeah,
Because as brands, at the end of the day, as much as we might like to have just tons of conversations with our audience, and unless your job is customer discovery and product
right.
marketing, you need to be able to tie it to marketing results at some point. That's one of the
Yeah,
reasons we added Threads at Agorapulse, because we already have our built-in proprietary ROI system, which tracks every link that's shared. It connects it to your Google Analytics and brings that data back in, so you can see what happened next. But
and
Threads
of
is
course,
new. It's
yeah, and of course, they launched their analytics finally too on desktop.
yeah,
So that's something people should look at too, to kind of, see what impact you're having and then being intentional. Like what is your goal of being on threads? Like just to be on it, or you know, um, yeah, setting those goals just like you would with any other platform, so that you can actually see whether it's doing something for your business.
right. And but to your point, they just launched it because, as we said at the
Yeah,
outset, Threads is still new. They're
yeah,
what, 2 years old now at the time of this recording. I think I just saw this week we're recording on Halloween in October, and Mosseri just announced, or actually Zuckerberg shared, that they're at 256 million monthly active users and adding about a million new accounts per day. So they're growing, but they're still relatively young, particularly compared to
yeah,
the other platforms. And what that means to professional marketers like you and I is that their API, their ability to connect with other tools, is very immature. Like, I said, we're at
yeah,
Agorapulse. We're only releasing Threads publishing at this point. We're not going to have deep analytics and insights like we do for the other networks. We can see how your Instagram posts perform and we can build that into the reports. We won't have that for a while. Are there any other tools that you're able to use that are helping you with Threads, either directly or indirectly?
yeah. So I think Threads desktop itself, the analytics are great, and then we like to tie in tools like Bitly so that we can track these custom links, so that you can see where the traffic is actually coming from. That I think is super helpful to see. Like we use those Bitly links whether I'm dropping them in my broadcast channel on Instagram or in a thread, and sometimes I will even drop links when I comment on someone's thread, if they need help with something and I have an entire free video on that topic, I'll share that with them. But like it's, I'm sharing links, providing value first. I'm not sharing a link to buy my product. I'm not even trying to sell anything. Most likely I may not even have anything to sell. And so I think for retail brands, that's important to keep in mind that a lot of threads activity is brand awareness for your brand, and that you want to always lead with value first, whatever that looks like for your brand.
That is terrific advice. Now, if you're looking ahead over the next 6 to 12 months into 2025, what opportunities would you see for retail brands on Threads?
Yeah, I think it's only growing the opportunity. If you're not on Threads yet, I don't think it's too late. I would say, start experimenting with that, create a strategy for the new year for that as it continues to evolve and you're still in the process early. So that means there's still a lot of opportunity and growth there. And even, of course, retail brands do partner a lot with influencers or whether it's UGC creators and all of that stuff. So maybe tap into that on Threads too, especially now that there are no ads yet, at least, right? To see like who can you leverage that is spending a lot of time on Threads, can advocate for your brand, whether they're posting about you or actually interacting with you. Because that's something I mentioned to the team where I was telling them, I think it's not only valuable for influencers to talk about a brand on Threads, but it's just as valuable for them to interact with a brand's Threads. Because I know if I interact with my team's Threads, I'm going to boost their visibility because it gets shown to my audience now. And so it's just a little nugget to keep in mind that, it's more than just posting or using people to post about your brand.
That is a terrific point. And it is one of the differentiators of Threads
Yeah.
versus all the other social platforms. If you comment on a post or if you even just like a post on Threads,
Right.
it's very possible that I will see it in my feed simply because I'm following you and I've engaged with your content on Threads. So that's a great use of influencers
Yeah.
and a great tip. Mill, you've been absolutely fantastic. I love chatting with you. I love all of your insights and certainly love following you on social networks. For those who want to learn more about all the great things you've got going on, where should they go?
Yeah, you can go to my Threads account. It's at Milu Peters. If you want to see kind of how I'm going about that and stuff like that. Or you can follow me on Instagram. I actually have like a very in-depth videos on YouTube as well under my name, Milu Peters, to kind of give you the scoop and start building out that strategy with you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mill. Thank you, all of you, for listening. We'll have all the links that Mill shared and we talked about in that show notes below. And we'll also have some additional resources from our content team at Agorapulse on how you can leverage Threads as a retail brand. So check those out. Until next time, see you. Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Pulse Podcast Retail Edition, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by Agorapulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player and be sure to leave us a review. Your feedback is important to